Oh, hey y'all. It's meteorologist Erica Lopez. Sorry about that. I'm getting a little distracted here. We're dissecting the new National Hurricane Center update that just came in here moments ago. And we're going to break it down here with our meteorologist, Matthew Cappucci. But let's go over the details first and start with the MyRadar app because this is important information that's coming in. We have several new watches and warnings in place for portions of the Florida Peninsula. And I was just checking here earlier, too, before we were coming on here live. Aerial flood watches that are also in place and flood watches now being issued for portions of the Florida West Coast here, and then also tropical storm watches for portions of Central Florida all the way down into portions of the East Coast of Florida. Now, tropical storm watches means conditions could occur within a 48-hour time frame. So right now is the time to prepare for this storm and the arrival of this storm. Again, we're dissecting the new information of the National Hurricane Center here. And of course, I'm joined by our meteorologist, Matthew Cappucci. And Matthew, we were just talking before we came on live here, some of the new information that's coming in and some of the new model runs on this storm system. Of course, we are still days away until this makes landfall, and it's very close there to Cuba, and it's intensifying rapidly. So, Matt, let's break down a little bit of what is expected after it passes over Cuba and expectations here over the Florida Peninsula. I know a lot of concern is for the Tampa Bay area as we speak.
For days about if the storm made a more northerly track and head to like the Big Bend of Florida, you'd see a lesser overall storm, a weaker storm, or if it hit land. Now it looks like that scenario is winding up being more likely to occur, so the risk of major impacts, we're talking Category 2 plus winds, destructive surge, damaging straight line winds within the hurricane, couple tornadoes, very significant inland flooding, all those things, the risk is increasing right now. So the trend is not our friend. Higher impacts likely with this storm. You've got to take it seriously. Here it is right now in Erica. We're finally seeing an eye actually form just west of the Isla de Providencia, or rather Juventud, a little bit south of Cuba. It's about to make landfall in the next 3 or 4 hours. It is so darn close to being a Category 3 storm. We hope it doesn't become that. Unfortunately, it likely will as it prepares to become a major hurricane en route to Cuba. Here you see all this convection or the thunderstorm activity. What you're seeing in the middle, though, notice this. Very dry air, warm cloud tops, meaning the air is being punched down. It's sinking, kind of eroding cloud cover. That's a sign of a very intense storm because you have all the rising air within the eye wall. That kind of hits the ceiling of the lower atmosphere, comes back down in the eye. So the eye is sinking air, and the strongest eyes are the ones that have the clearest skies. And in this case, of course, you see a bit of clearing, at least on infrared. Now, we can't expect to see much on visible satellite imagery just by virtue of the fact that it's nighttime, the sun has gone down. If we switch to water vapor imagery, you'll be able to see quite well. The outflow is actually already over Florida, so we got some showers and thunderstorms here earlier on, right around 9 o'clock in the Orlando metro, loosely related to the overall circulation associated with Ian. Heavier showers and thunderstorms over South Florida right now. A couple of water spouts possible offshore the Keys, from Miami southwards, even the Bahamas, the northwest Bahamas, seeing the outflow. All this exhaust air fanning away from the storm. This is kind of the guts of the storm. It's looking really bad right now, and it will get only worse as we head forward. So let's take a look, actually, at the latest aircraft reconnaissance from inside the storm. For starters, pressure's down to 967. They're finding very strong winds, especially east of the center. Keep in mind, east of the center, that's going to be the side that hits Florida. But notice this, 967, we've dropped about 15 millibars in terms of air pressure. So like 1.5% of the atmosphere's ambient mass since about, say, 3 or 4 p.m. What that means is the storm is evacuating more air up and out of the center, and the more it sucks out the top, the more it can kind of rush in the bottom. Imagine, we've used this analogy before, imagine you got a fan blowing all of the air up out of the top of a chimney. Well, the more that goes out, the more it's going to be sucked in down bottom to replace it, and the more air that rushes into the chimney, the bigger those flames grow. Same thing here. So the greater the void, the faster the air rushes in to fill that down below, the lower the air pressure drops, and of course the stronger the winds. Now, why doesn't that void fill in? Picture you're spinning a cup of coffee. The reason that dip in the middle, if you're kind of stirring your coffee, doesn't fill in is because the fluid is pushed outwards by the spinning motion. In this case, the wind is kind of spiraling around. That circular wind is experiencing the centrifugal force, pushing it outwards, preventing it from filling in like this. So cool stuff there, but disturbing stuff in terms of the actual observations. Go back, and of course, this is from our friend Levi Cohen at Tropical Tidbits, brilliant guy. But I want to show you something kind of cool right here, okay? So here was their pass through the storm. The hurricane hunters at flight level wind, found winds about 95 knots, so roughly 105 to 110 miles an hour. So on the cusp of Category 3. It's probably so close to it right now. But then, of course, so they're flying through the eye wall. They fly into the eye. That wind dies down to next to nothing, and air pressure bottoms out at like 965 millibars. But I want you to notice, when they were going through the eye, oh, it's frozen. Here we go. When they were going through the eye, air temperature actually spiked. Because remember, hurricanes are warm core systems. As the air inside the eye goes down, punches down, it dries out and it heats up due to a process called adiabatic compression. So really, the more sinking air you have in the middle of the storm, in the eye, the greater the spike in temperature. So we're spiking like 10 degrees Celsius, which is what? Roughly 14, 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So impressive stuff there, meaning this storm is really getting its act together in kind of a stressful, really disconcerting way. So let's take a look at our latest cone from the National Hurricane Center. We've been expecting an eastward shift, and indeed we're kind of seeing that right now. They are now explicitly forecasting a serious hurricane landfall. Look at this, the M right there, M for major. At this point, likely a 120 mile an hour Category 3 as it approaches sometime on Wednesday afternoon or evening. And honestly, I think the storm will come in a little sooner than this and eventually move inland right towards Tampa Bay. This is a worst case scenario path. If this winds up being right, you got a virtually major hurricane swirling counterclockwise, pushing water ashore right into Tampa Bay, 5 to 10 foot storm surge. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing those numbers actually realized. So here's our forecast for peak surge. Again, here you see forecast at 11 p.m., so it's the latest information. 5 to 10 feet for Tampa Bay, 5 to 8 feet down the coast in the direction of Fort Myers, the Caloosahatchee River. I think risk is also increasing down here towards Naples as well. So the farther south you go, also increasing danger. So really, initially it looked like here would be kind of the big threat area. We've been talking for days. This really is a Western Florida threat now, and the threat is only beginning to grow. So let's talk the models, kind of what we can expect, because ultimately, we're within 48 hours of a potential landfall. Let's get to some of the more specific hurricane models. We'll start off with this one, the H-WRF. And this one, kind of brings it close to the coastline. It's a very intense hurricane. This one doesn't make a landfall, so there is still some wiggle room, at least in that part of Florida. The H-MON, however, kind of simulates it with the rest. And personally, I trust the H-MON. I really do. Thank you very much. I got to say, I trust the H-MON because I've dealt with it before. It's a pretty good model, and it brings a high-end Category 2, low-end Category 3 right into Tampa, if not a little bit to the south. If we take a look at the new American GFS model, we'll go down to U.S. states, Florida. Same exact thing. Really intense hurricane, right in kind of the most dangerous part that you can possibly go. The European model, now saying the same exact thing, near if not just a little south of Tampa. That's why I say Tampa downtown, you're kind of right in the middle of all these different lines, all these different paths. And the German Icon model showing, once again, a path in a very distressing area. We take a look at the last scan. That right there. Into areas between Tampa and down towards Naples and Fort Myers. So Erica, I got to say, all the data we're looking at right now, very alarming, very concerning.
Yeah, and especially with citizens that live along this coast, we've already starting to see our first evacuation orders in the Tampa Bay area for some counties specific to there. So this is why they're already issuing these evacuation orders. We have several new warnings and watches over this region. Of course, one of our big concerns is the potential of storm surge, like Matthew Cappucci was saying earlier. This will pose a dangerous threat. And not only that, but we're going to start to see a lot of rainfall increase over this region over the next couple of hours here. And we're already starting to see some of the first initial rain bands of Hurricane Ian as it's coming close portions of Cuba. So if we go to the MyRadar app, I want to show you what's going on there really quickly before we go back and analyze a little bit more of the information. But I do want to inform you that a lot of the rain that you're already seeing over Florida, and of course, let me know in the chat where you're watching from. I see a lot of you are from Florida. Some of you saying you're not going to go to bed until you know what's going to go on in Florida this evening. So this is what we're here for. We're here to inform you. Ask your questions in the chat. We're going to be happy to answer them this evening as we're dissecting the new National Hurricane Center update. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on radar, because like I mentioned earlier, we are watching a lot of the initial rain bands coming into portions of Florida, and you can already see some of this rain even reaching portions of Miami, but this will start to increase in nature. And then once it makes landfall, so we're expecting Hurricane Ian to make landfall later on this evening in portions of Cuba as a strong hurricane, Category 3 status. And then as it moves over water here, increasing to a Category 4 storm, and then eventually reaching areas of the Tampa Bay area. So this is our main concern. But of course, if you live anywhere across the Florida West Coast, like I said, we're seeing all those evacuation orders. And you guys out there, just stay prepared ahead of the storm. This will make landfall between, we'd say, Wednesday and Thursday, depending on exactly where the landfall could be right now. It could be anywhere within this cone. And this is why they have such a wide gap between this cone, because it could make landfall either just to the east of that area or in that outlined area over this region. So a lot to talk about here, especially for portions like us here in Central Florida. We're actually under a tropical storm watch here. And not only does this extend for portions of Central Florida, my concerns as well lie across portions of even Jacksonville and portions of Georgia and the Carolinas. As the storm moves up, now its track does take it over portions of these inland regions. And we also have the threat of storm surge even on Florida's east coast and across those areas. So here, storm surge is also predicted. We may get some of those easterly winds pushing some of that water up over this region. So not only am I concerned for areas of Tampa once it makes landfall, as it goes over land and moves over these regions, we also have those concerns of flooding and a lot of rainfall. So let's actually go to WSI here and show you the projected rainfall totals over the next 3 days. As you can see, a lot of rainfall in the forecast, up to 10 plus inches of rainfall, especially for portions just to the north of the Tampa Bay area, also included in this. But look at this. This also includes areas like Jacksonville, Gainesville, and then later on in the weekend into the weekend, we may even have some inland impacts. And I'm talking about you guys in Georgia and the Carolinas. So if you're watching us from there as well, something to be alert on for this weekend. Not only are we watching concerns in Florida, but also as the storm system moves up. And also the threat of severe weather, like Matthew Cappucci was mentioning earlier. That's one of the big risk factors with these potential tropical systems as they move inland, of course, bringing in all of those severe weather threats heading into the next several days. Now, we're days away from this making landfall, but as we get closer to the day, a lot of these impacts will start to increase in nature. And of course, the risk of storm surge. So Matt, interesting looking at this system right now on radar and on satellite, becoming bigger and growing in nature.
It certainly is. And one thing I'm paying attention to right now, if we can actually go back to this, we're talking that danger of storm surge because, of course, water is being pushed against the coastline. One thing that's really stressing me about this is, let me check this in real quick. There we go. Yeah, so this is a look at what we call bathymetry, basically the shape of the seafloor in this part of the Gulf of Mexico. Notice it's very shallow, relatively shallow, all across here. It's not like a swimming pool where your feet can touch the bottom, but in terms of the ocean, it's rather shallow, only a few hundred meters to perhaps a kilometer or two deep in this part of the Gulf of Mexico. What that means is it's way easier to push water against the coastline and stack up a pretty big storm surge, even from a lower-end hurricane. Now we're potentially talking about a mid-end hurricane, Cat 2, Cat 3, and when you factor that in, plus how shallow the water is, remember it's easier to push shallow water ashore than deep water, you're going to move a lot of volume of water, cause a big-time storm surge. Somebody's really going to see some potentially devastating impacts. And so one thing we can take a look at actually is NOAA's slosh model. What this means is kind of a storm surge risk map. So here's Tampa Bay. Notice all the bridges across the bay, of course, but look at all the red. The red is from a Category 2 hurricane who theoretically would be beneath 9 feet of water. All the entire Barrier Island, all these hotels, all these fancy schmancy apartment buildings, these folks could be underwater if a Category 2 took a worst case scenario path. We'll zoom into St. Petersburg. You can see all these neighborhoods right near or underwater. Yellow is 3 feet of flooding. Orange is about 6 feet of flooding. Red is roughly 9 feet of flooding. So big time inundation. Then look over here as we head towards what looks like Sun City, entire neighborhoods that would likely be underwater or inundated to at least some extent. So Gulf City Road, for example, they'd be mostly underwater. Look at all these places. These are very busy areas. Look at all these houses. They would be underwater in the event of a Category 2 landfall. And we're expecting Category 2 to Category 3. That's why a lot of these folks in Hillsborough and Pinellas County are under a mandatory evacuation, as well they darn should, because keep in mind, you can run from water, but you can't hide from water. That's why I always say, folks, you got to run from the water, hide from the wind. You can shelter from wind, assuming your home or your structure doesn't blow away, but you can't really hide from water. You just got to outrun it, really. That's why we tell folks go inland. We'll see some major closures up and down this part of the world in the next, I'd say, 24 hours. A lot of folks here are really going to evacuate. Now, let's say, just as a hypothetical, let's say we get a Category 3, which we potentially could. Then we're talking about really major areas, the Air Force Base here. Let's just look at all these neighborhoods. We're talking like entire zip codes, Erica, that would have to evacuate from a high-end storm surge scenario like this. And that's why, understandably, the National Hurricane Center is getting pretty concerned about this. One other thing I want to point out, too, we have a litany of other hazards we're facing. So let's first talk about the wind, of course. Here's what the European model is simulating for wind speed and wind gusts. We're talking winds potentially gusting 115 plus miles an hour at the coastline if the storm moves ashore in this particular way. The European model, even more bullish. The strongest winds would be within this donut near the center. You go 20 miles outside the eye, 30 miles outside the eye, yeah, you'll get 60, 70 mile an hour gusts, but it won't be enough to destroy your home, whereas right near the center, you can't shelter from this in a mobile home. You can't shelter from this in an outbuilding. You need a well-built home, ideally something inland, because near the coastline, if we're talking 110 mile an hour wind gusts, 115 mile an hour wind gusts, right where the eye wall makes landfall, that's enough to destroy a number of structures. It's like a EF2 to almost EF3 tornado if this is realized. This particular model is throwing out a 112 for the wind speed near or just south of Tampa Bay. Of course, we can't really rule that out yet. We can't say whether or not that's actually going to verify, but it kind of goes to show you. The other concern I have, of course, if we wind up getting a hurricane like this, precipitation. Check this out. Where the hurricane makes landfall, the strongest winds will be to the east, the heaviest rainfall will be to the west. But notice, you can be all the way in northeast Florida, south of Jacksonville. Here's Volusia County, here's the Titusville, here's the Space Coast. I actually went skydiving over here, great place. Anyway, really all across central Florida, you might see a strip of 10 to 20 inches worth of rain, especially near and just west or north of the center of the cyclone, really to the left of the storm center, which is pretty alarming. And the other thing, too, potential tornadoes. What do I mean by that? Well, hurricanes wind up having a good deal of wind shear or changing wind speed and or direction with height within them because the surface winds slow down thanks to friction. Of course, they encounter land, the surface winds slow down, but the winds aloft are still rushing. They're still kind of screaming overhead, for which reason you get a change of wind speed with height that induces these overturning circulations. What that does is mean anything that winds up kind of growing updraft-wise. If a storm updraft goes up, it'll tap into that spin, tilt it vertically, produce a rotating thunderstorm or tornado. And already, we're seeing by tomorrow afternoon, these spiral rain bands work ashore into southern Florida. And notice how they're kind of arcing a little bit. They're kind of kinked. They're kidney bean shaped. That means there will be rotation within them. That same thing overspreads much of south and central Florida. And you can see this model actually has the eye making landfall somewhere between the Caloosahatchee River and Tampa. We can't guarantee where. Notice, though, this model is kind of simulating what I expect, which is the west side of the system will be more active in terms of rainfall. So this might be one of those scenarios where ordinarily the eastern side is a little bit windier. This might actually bring down some precipitation drag, kind of help carrying down momentum from aloft and cause stronger winds on the north side of the system too. So really, an impressive scenario unfolding here. But ultimately, where this eye makes landfall will determine how significant the impacts are from the standpoint of flooding. Here's what the HMON model suggests. Again, it kind of shows the same thing. Heaviest rain off to the north. Here's the eye right here. Still some feeder bands off to the south, but really, you're going to get some big-time surge, big-time wind, and even on the other part of the state, you could still see tornadoes as well. So, Erica, I think Wednesday is going to be a really tough day, and Wednesday night, it's going to be a long, long, dangerous night.
Yeah, and it's no surprise it's the National Hurricane Center with the latest update. So I have to correct myself because I said across Central Florida there was tropical storm watches, but now they've issued tropical storm warnings. Does include us here in Orlando, so that's Orange County. Also includes hurricane warnings now issued for areas in Tampa there and all across that Florida West Coast. So this is stuff that's new, that's happening. So if you get an alert on your phone, there's a hurricane warning. That means take those precautions. Conditions are really going to start to deteriorate heading into the next several days. We also have tropical storm watches now issued for Florida's East Coast. That also includes Jacksonville, you guys in Daytona Beach, Cocoa Beach, all the way down to Maribel, Florida. And then hurricane watches just to the north of Pinellas and Hillsborough County there in Tampa. So a lot going on here. I know much of the central Florida region and portions of the Florida West Coast here are seeing these new alerts. And this evening, this is why we come on this late at night. I know a lot of you concerned because there's always changing updates from the National Hurricane Center, especially in terms of what the storm might do here. And of course, the track that's been keeping us on our toes over the last several days. But what we do know now is these impacts will start to affect portions. Some of you are saying it's already raining in Miami. These are the first initial rain bands from Hurricane Ian as it's closing in there on Cuba here, and of course expected to make a landfall as a major hurricane over this area. So a lot of concern now coming into portions of the Tampa Bay area, and of course we're going to be answering them here, but I want you guys to stay prepared. Plan ahead. I know maybe you took the weekend to plan ahead. Evacuation orders have been issued. Check in on your friends and family too. If you know anybody who lives there in Tampa or across Florida's West Coast, just make sure you're checking in with them and that they know what's going on, the situation across these regions in terms of Hurricane Ian. But something too I want to highlight is earlier in the evening. So we have a partnership here with Flash, and they provide a lot of great information on their websites. And our meteorologist, Mike Linden, actually talked earlier in the evening to Leslie Chapman, and she was speaking about what to do during these types of situations. And of course, later on in the live stream, I want to show you how you can get all this information, especially maybe you don't live in Tampa, but you're more so maybe on the Florida East Coast here, and some things that you can talk. But let's take that and let's talk a little bit and show you what Mike Linden, our meteorologist, talked to about with Leslie Chapman earlier this afternoon.
Leslie, of course, 'tis the season. It is hurricane season, a relatively quiet one thus far, but you certainly cannot let your guard down this time of year. And we are learning that really quickly here with Hurricane Ian beginning its turn northward. Of course, thank you so much for joining us. So Hurricane Strong, of course, is an amazing program that you guys have launched over the past couple of years, but we have continuously tried to remind people that on the Hurricane Strong website, there's a full number of checklists for people. Of course, there's still time to prepare as this storm begins to work its way northward. What would you recommend for people to do here in the coming days and even hours as Ian works its way northward toward the west coast of Florida?
Well, thanks so much, Mike. You're right. We've gone to great lengths to try to organize and simplify the information you need to get ready for and protect your home from hurricanes. And all of it is online at hurricanestrong.org in this, here's my checklist format. And the reason we do that is because when we get to this stage, people just tell us again and again, please just tell me what I need to do. So I want to talk first about flooding, because we are getting calls and I'm getting texts from people that are a little bit confused. So we want to start with flood safety. Flood safety in this type of event, especially because of the west coast of Florida and its propensity to be inundated, is about whether or not first you are living in a storm surge evacuation zone, okay? And the way you find out is you can go to hurricanestrong.org. The first one says safety. There's 5 bubbles across the top. Click on safety, it says know your zone, and you're going to pull up a PDF with links to all of the counties and all of the communities from the whole US coastline, including Florida. Now, there's a word of caution here. The websites for our West Coast communities of Florida are taking time to load. So don't give up if you get an error message on the internet. Just give it a minute and it'll populate, and then you'll see A, B, C, D, E, right, and color-coded.
Leslie, of course, 'tis the season. It is hurricane season, a relatively quiet one thus far, but you certainly cannot let your guard down this time of year. And we are learning that really quickly here with Hurricane Ian beginning its turn northward. Of course, thank you so much for joining us. So Hurricane Strong, of course, is an amazing program that you guys have launched over the past couple of years, but we have continuously tried to remind people that on the Hurricane Strong website, there's a full number of checklists for people. Of course, there's still time to prepare as this storm begins to work its way northward. What would you recommend for people to do here in the coming days and even hours as Ian works its way northward toward the west coast of Florida?
Well, thanks so much, Mike. You're right. We've gone to great lengths to try to organize and simplify the information you need to get ready for and protect your home from hurricanes. And all of it is online at hurricanestrong.org in this, here's my checklist format. And the reason we do that is because when we get to this stage, people just tell us again and again, please just tell me what I need to do. So I want to talk first about flooding, because we are getting calls and I'm getting texts from people that are a little bit confused. So we want to start with flood safety. flood safety in this type of event, especially because of the west coast of Florida and its propensity to be inundated, is about whether or not first you are living in a storm surge evacuation zone. Okay. And the way you find out is you can go to hurricanestrong.org. The first one says safety. There's 5 bubbles across the top. Click on safety, it says know your zone, and you're going to pull up a PDF with links to all of the counties and all of the communities from the whole US coastline, including Florida. Now, there's a word of caution here. The websites for our West Coast communities of Florida are taking time to load. So don't give up if you get an error message on the internet. Just give it a minute and it'll populate, and then you'll see A, B, C, D, E, right? And color-coded maps. You can figure out where you reside. And that way, when the mandatory evacuation orders go up or voluntary, you'll know, oh, I live in an A zone, which some A zones are under evac orders now. I need to go. So it's a little complicated and people are getting it confused because that A, B, C, D, E is similar to flood zones, which are different. Flood zone is a VAX, and that is a different thing. And you can have an X or an A flood zone in all different kinds of places, not just coastal. So, but first decide and figure out your status for evacuation. Where are you going to go? Try to stay out of the shelters if you have friends or family, so you leave those open to people who don't have other options, right? And the last part of flood safety is, okay, so you're not in a storm surge evacuation zone, you're not in a flood zone, but you could still have stormwater issues at your house. So we want you to analyze your home, where you live, what typically happens during a thunderstorm around your house, where does the water pond and collect, and make sure your gutters are cleaned out, the water's draining away from your foundation, not towards it. If you're using sandbags, again, we have a whole checklist on this. Only fill them halfway full. Know that you can only do 3 layers. Understand you need to leave little openings for debris flow. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts with sandbags, and we have that information for you. So flood is the first one, Mike, and that's a lot to digest. But again, it's all on the internet for you.
I know one of the biggest misconceptions for folks is to rush out, board up their home using tape. And of course, that is certainly not something that you recommend. What would you recommend that folks do in order to make sure that their windows, doors, and things are properly secured?
Sure. So let's talk about wind safety, right? Which means you have to protect your openings. Openings are windows, doors, garage doors. Big deal, because 90+% of the time when the wind breaches your house, it happens with the garage door because it's your largest and weakest opening. Also things like gable end vents. So how do you protect those openings? Well, you may have shutters already, you need to put them up. You may have impact resistant glass windows, you need to find out. If you have those, the window will be etched, it will say so with the approval stamp right there. If you don't have either of those, you still do have time to use plywood of a certain thickness, 5/8 inch is what we recommend, and cut to fit plywood boards to put over those openings that are at risk, especially those with glass, right? So there's a checklist that will guide you through how to do it. It's a really great activity to team up with your neighbors and friends. You board up their house, they come help you board up your house. It reduces stress and strain, and then you can make sure that the boards stay in place when the wind comes. Don't put masking tape on the glass. That's an old myth, but it's unfortunately a deadly myth. In Hurricane Charlie, eerily similar path to Ian's track so far, or projected potential track, the first fatality was to someone standing behind a glass sliding door protected with flimsy solar film. They thought that that would save them by keeping the glass intact. Unfortunately, what tape and film and duct tape, and we get these questions, they're like, what about duct tape? We love duct tape, but not for this, right? The problem with it is the tape makes the glass into larger shards, and you're still going to get the broken glass, but those shards become larger, and unfortunately, in that gentleman's case in Charlie, deadly as well. So don't tape your windows. It's also a heck of a mess to clean up afterwards.
Right. And of course, there are items outside of your home as well that can become quite deadly as well, with hurricane strength and tropical storm force winds lofting those items and taking them into potentially your house or even into your neighbor's yard. What are some of the things that you would recommend that folks do outside of their home to make sure that they're prepared for the oncoming storm?
That's a perfect question. So you need to go kind of on a missile hunt. You walk around your yard and you look at every single thing that could potentially be picked up by the wind and be turned into a missile that can then in turn damage your home, your roof, or your neighbor's roof. So we're talking dead limbs and trees, but don't start cutting any limbs if you don't have anywhere to put them before the storm, right? Garden gnomes, garden decor, swing sets. We hear a lot of stories after the storm. People go, oh, I forgot to take the swing off the swing set and it battered the window through the whole storm. Barbecue grills, lawn furniture. Some people recommend, we will not recommend it, but in a last ditch effort, sometimes people pitch their lawn furniture into the pool. You know, desperate measures. And I always like to say, you know, just in case preparation is way better than just in time because the stress level goes up and up. But go all the way around the house and look for anything that can become airborne. At my house, it's potted plants, and there are so many, and the garage is full of them right now because I live in Tallahassee, because we don't know what's going to happen by the time you know for sure. It's usually too late to do anything about it. So that's a big part of wind safety as well, because those missiles are not just dangerous, you know, to you, but they also create tons of damage.
Now, of course, as I touched on before, folks are, heading to their stores now, grabbing food, water, and supplies. We're seeing pictures and video of people really starting to ramp up potentially to an unnecessary degree. But that being said, what would you say to maybe calm folks down as this storm begins to work its way northward? As you mentioned, managing stress, certainly part of this process. What would you say to those folks in order to put their minds at ease?
Well, I think sometimes one of the things that really freaks people out, frankly, is the idea of being without power. But you can make that work too if you're prepared. So we have the list, of course, everyone knows water, you know, for everybody in the household, X number of gallons for 72 hours, you know, medicine, pet food, peanut butter and jelly, tuna fish. Get some board games out so if your kids like to use a tablet and electronics, you don't have power, you need to kind of revert to old fashioned things like card games. We have Go Fish ready to go for our grandkids, and Old Maid and different things that, you know, we can do to stay busy, coloring books and coloring, you know, all the things for power outage, but also remember, you know, ice, etc. If you're using a generator, we have a lot of new residents here in Florida since the last time we had a landfall. Get the manual out and read it now while it's calm, and make sure you understand how to use it. We do unfortunately have deaths after these events from improperly ventilated generators. That carbon monoxide that comes out of your generator is why that generator needs to be 20 feet or further away from your home, and there's specific ways to hook it up to make sure it doesn't backfeed into your panel, and then it endangers power and utility company workers as well. So just get your stuff, have some cash, put some gas in your car, and just take advantage of the opportunity for, you know, the family to come together inside your home. Make sure you have your safest, most interior room, hopefully windowless, where if you have to really hunker down and there's a tornado as a result of this where you live, and we know those can extend beyond the specific area where the landfall is, just plan ahead and know that you're gonna get through it. But don't wait too late, but it's a balancing act, as you mentioned. People get nervous and anxiety, but every step you take to prepare is going to tilt the balance towards that confidence you're going to have that you're going to get through the storm. Your power might go out, but you have a plan for how to, you know, feed your family, distract your kids, and then just stay in tune for communication. Critical. You guys do a great job keeping everybody alerted to the weather. Sign up for your local utility providers updates. You can get them on text, and that doesn't use a lot of power. And, you know, sign up for every, you know, alerting from your local government, emergency management, the utilities, and then you'll know where your community stands as you guys get through it, and then you're on the road to recovery.
Leslie, you're such a calming presence. I always enjoy chatting with you, of course, in the midst of all the craziness that is heading toward the Sunshine State. You're let alone the calming presence, but a wealth of information. Of course, hurricanestrong.org has literally everything you need to make sure that you and yours stay safe. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we might not necessarily have touched on?
Well, we do still have a toll-free telephone hotline. It's 877-221-SAFE, SAFE.